I want to be grabbed as a listener before I'm grabbed as a producer. I want to hear, Idols or Fontaine's DC and go, whoa, what? These guys don't sound like anything. What the hell is this? Thundercat. I love Thundercat. I don't know what he's doing. He's crazy. He's awesome. Margaret Glaspie I'm into lately. I love her. Middle Kids, another Tame Impala, Avalanches. I'm naming all my favorite Australian.
Welcome to Audio Technology Magazine's ISO Booth podcast, where we phone audio engineers and producers at home. And thanks to the pandemic lockdown, they answer. Hey everybody, welcome to another Audio Technology Magazine ISO Booth podcast. Today, a very special guest, Joe Chiccarelli, music producer extraordinaire, coming to us from LA. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to do this.
Joe's been a long-time friend of the magazine. Very grateful for Joe's time over the years. We've had some great chats. And Joe, where does that date back to? Can you give us a little bit of a potted history of you in Australia?
Wow. Well, over the years, there's been so many projects from Boy and Bear and Bernard Fanning and Augie March, Jim Wigmore, many things over the years. And I don't know, I think my first trip down there was maybe in the 90s, going to the Australian Export Music Fair at the Fox Studios. I remember my first trip down there. So I've got a great history with it. I love being down there for projects.
Yeah, sure. And you're even currently working on something that's got an Australian angle? Yes,
working on an artist called Didiri, who's signed to Network Records here. Really wonderful artist, beautiful voice. In fact, he was supposed to be back in the States right about now to do some more recording, but of course things have changed. Sure. He's great. We cut 2 songs and we're planning to do more, but he's in Melbourne now. I think he's going to do a little work on the tracks on his own, but they turned out great, really great. Beautiful singer, alternative, but really beautiful, rich voice, very emotive, really wonderful singer.
And obviously Indigenous, is that right?
No. I'm not sure where the name comes from, to be really honest.
Okay, sure.
But it's not.
Yeah. And I've found you in your home studio as such.
Yes. Yeah, I have a private room here on the Sunset Sound lot in LA. It's in a little house, so I'm here all by myself, isolated. And I've had this for about 5 years, I think now. When budgets kind of got cut down, I needed a small space to work in. So I usually go to the main rooms at Sunset Sound, do my tracking, spend a couple of weeks on an album there, get all my bass and drums and, my main part of my tracking. And then I bring it here to this room and do guitars and keys and vocals and in the box mixing.
Okay, sure. How much of your work, your mixing work would be done here versus on a larger room?
Well, these days, unfortunately, most of it is done in the box. I love mixing on a console, but I don't get to do it as often as I would like, mainly for budget reasons. It's not a choice. I've done things in the box, on the console, and a combination of both, and they all have their place. Here in my room, I have a analog summing network. I go through a Burl summing box, and then I have an analog signal chain that I favor. It's a Chandler curve bender equalizer, a Shadow Hills compressor, and then I sometimes put things on the back end like a Clariphonic parallel EQ or perhaps a Massenburg EQ, that kind of thing.
Okay. It'd be fascinating to, I guess, get a sense of like, I know you blasted your way through that explanation, I guess, of some of what you do in the room, but just to kind of, maybe is it a good time to break that down a little bit? Just
Sure.
like, we're looking at things there right now, and people, I think, will be a little distracted if I start talking about something else, and they're just looking in the background past you, going, "Well, what's he using that for?"
Well, so I have a Avid C24,
Sure.
which I use for balances mainly.
Yep.
My monitoring is through a dangerous monitoring system. For compression, I have Uri 1178 and 1176. I have a Shadow Hills, Anthony Di Maria, distressors, and some other various compressors in another part of the room here that you can't see. I don't know if we want to move this around, but and then I have a few API racks with 550 EQs, Sunset Sound preamps, API preamps. I also have an Overstayer modular channel box. It's called an 8755, I think, which is a company, Overstayer, here in Los Angeles. Basically, it's a 2-channel mic preamp with a Moog type ladder filter, a 3-band EQ, a compressor, and a pretty serious overdrive saturation circuit. And you're able to put all those in the path, blend them together, put them in different forms. And I tend to use that a lot for synthesizers. That's my kind of secret weapon for keyboards. The filters are pretty severe, and they really let me sculpt keyboards in the track. A lot of times, keyboards can get a little bright and fizzy, and especially when you stack them up. So this allows me to really filter down the top end or distort them to make them fit in with guitars. It's just a great tool. It's maybe my favorite piece of gear here in the room. That and the Chandler Curve Bender, which has been a part of all my mixes since, I think, the White Stripes in 2008 or 9. Yeah.
So describe, I guess, how you have the best of both worlds, the in the box, keeping it digital versus breaking it out and leveraging the great analog gear that you've got.
Yeah, I found for my ear, the digital summing is a little tight, a little small sounding, and loving large format analog consoles, I really still wanted to get that tone. I wanted to have something that I could drive hard when I needed to. I chose the Burl because it was a very simple, clean summing box, but it also seems to have a richer, more analog kind of sound. I tend to not really adjust the gain in it. I leave it set at unity, but I drive it, cold or hot, depending what I need on the project. But for my ear, breaking it out into 32 channels of summing really just gave me much more size in the record. It's just more toneful for my ear.
Sure. So you come 32 channels out of Pro Tools. Some of those will obviously be stems of like groups of instruments, perhaps,
Yes.
and then into the Burl. And then do you then go into sort of the other outboard as kind of inserts, as it were? Or how do you go?
Most of the one interesting thing for me is really when I'm tracking, I'm printing all the sounds that I want. So my post-processing, if you will, is maybe not as much as a lot of people would do that tend to record more conservatively.
Right.
So like I mentioned with the Overstay or any of the boxes I have in here, or the great sounding custom API in Sunset, I'm really processing things to my ear, to my liking when I track them. So the mixing process to me is not one of major reinvention. It's really balances. Of course, there's EQ and compression and parallel compression like anybody else, but it might not be as much for a project that I've tracked all myself than a project that maybe comes in here that was recorded in a different manner.
Gotcha. Yeah, and
I did forget to mention that at the very end of my chain is a Burl B2 Bomber converter. I love the sound of the B2. I found that that's just a really, really wonderful, again, almost analog kind of tone. So that's my last stop before I go into the HD I/O converters, and I go in. Everything is always 2496. If the project, or I should say 3296 in working with Pro Tools, but if I'm doing something that doesn't require a lot of plugins, isn't track intensive, I will record at 192. I like the sound of 192 a lot, but it tends to be for more simple projects that are maybe 24 tracks.
Yeah, right. And I guess finally, looking at the view behind you, I guess the haters are going to hate because what do you got an Ultradyne there for, Charlie?
Oh, that's funny. I have a spectrum analyzer that I've always used one on my mix. I've always had a RTA that I hang across the bus that really lets me know low end. My control room is a little shallow here, so it's a little tricky with the low end. So I can really tell my balance of octaves between my 30 and 60 and 120 kind of thing. It really, really helps me out. Helps me out with sibilance problems. I can tell just how it peaks when I know I'll know my S's are too much. So it's an inexpensive analyzer. I think that you can find them on eBay for $75 or something.
Collector's item.
Exactly.
It leads me, I guess, to an interesting line of inquiry here, because you're experiencing what the rest of us plebeians experience all the time, and that's monitoring in less than perfect monitoring rooms. Like, have you got any advice? Like, you've got some fairly chunky midfields there sitting on your meter bridge. And obviously you're not using those at 110 dB all day, but how do you iron out the worst of sort of less than perfect monitoring situations?
Yeah, it's tricky in this particular control room. It's tricky. I've done a lot of trapping here, but like I said, it is a shallow room, so the bass is a challenge at times. I have the ATC 45s, which have been my go-to monitor for the last close to 10 years now. Is when they first came out with them, I heard them and immediately fell in love with them, and have been using those. I have Acoustic Energy AE1s that tend to be my NS10 substitute. They're a little smoother, a little easier on the ears. They really help me push the mid-range in a great way. I really like how they make me bring things forward. In terms of getting around those low-end issues, I just actually tend to move around my room a lot. I'll sit on a different chair. I'll sit on a couch in the back. I'll even go in the bathroom and listen from the bathroom. And that's kind of, I got it down now where I sort of know where to judge my vocal level, where to judge my bass level. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of other things that you can do. I do have some other small speakers that I use. They're old AR I think they're AR1s, the AR-powered partners, they call them. They're a little desktop speaker-powered amplifier speaker, and they're just really accurate for balances. I really love them. Even when people, oftentimes I won't mix my own records, and I'll have a pair of these desktops at home, and people send me mixes, and I'll make small balance critiques to them, and they'll come back to me going like, whoa, how'd you hear that? That was like so spot on. And there's something about the mid-range in them that and it just seems to work for me. They're almost like a full-bodied tone or something. I don't know.
And I know you're not a mastering engineer, but do you think much about, I guess, how people are mostly consuming music now and how that's changed over the last 10 years? And I guess, whether it's the ubiquitous white buds or how that's changed. Do you give that much consideration, or when you're talking to the mastering engineer, do you give that consideration?
Well, most of the mastering engineers I use, which is pretty much Emily Lazar and Bob Ludwig, Brian Lucy occasionally, they all check things on buds. I don't really check my mixes on earbuds. I will take into consideration things that are perhaps panned extremed or maybe poked too hard out on one side, but I can't really mix for laptop speakers or earbuds. It was almost like mixing for the car. If I mix for the car, it might sound great in my car, but in everybody else's car, it's going to sound terrible. So to me, it's a big mistake to kind of try to chase that.
Sure. You're right.
I trust the mastering engineers that I worked with, and I think they have that down.
Yeah, for sure. And do you have any relationship with headphones in your control room? Do you?
Yeah, I check things. I like the Audio-Technica M50s, I think they are. That's a pretty reliable, good bass response. I can trust that in terms of balances, and I always know when the low end's too much on those phones, because they have a healthy bottom end, but not as hyped as Beats, perhaps. So I can kind of get a good sense of low end on those. A lot of people like the Beyers and Sennheisers of late, the 770s, I think that's what it is.
Yeah,
but
they're a lovely headphone, yeah.
Yeah, they really are. Good, not fatiguing on the ears.
While we're talking about gear, you mentioned to me, I guess, prior to the interview, of a project that I didn't know that you'd been pursuing, which sounds fascinating. Do you want to kind of pick up that story with the microphone development?
Yes. Well, it started actually quite some time ago. I was doing a lot of mixing for people that had done projects at their home studio, and at the time I think that people were really fascinated with these super inexpensive condenser microphones, that most of them had these really super hyped top ends, that they were just, the 15-20K was just very unnatural. And when I'd get these tracks in to mix, it was always really hard to get the vocal to sit in the track without it sounding harsh or peaky. And I always ended up having to do a lot of work, and I was sort of thinking about people working in their home and trying to basically find an affordable microphone. And I was sort of, why is everybody gravitating towards these overly hyped mics? There's plenty of other mics out there that have a nice sweet top end, but are not so harsh. And one mic that I've always loved over the years, and I'm fortunate in that Sunset Sound, where I work, they have 9 of them, I think, are these old C37A tube microphones. They were always really a very, very unique sound for me. They have a very soft upper mid-range, but they have a nice amount of air up at 15K, and there's enough chest and warmth in them that a lot of vocalists sound great. In fact, for years it was Sinatra's favorite vocal microphone. Right. So I went to the folks at PMI Audio who make Tone Lux and Trident. They're friends of mine. And I just said, hey, what about trying to recreate this mic? I think we could maybe, do something that would be a $1,200-$1,400 microphone that most people can afford. Unfortunately, 6-7 years later of development, we could never bring the thing in at $1,200.
Yep.
It's just impossible. Research the amount of transformers that we went through to find the right one. We actually even finally, in the end, had to go back to the transformer company in Japan that made the original transformers in the 1950s. And they're making the transformers for us. So it's been quite a long project, but the mics are in production. And I can confidently say we're about 97-98% of the sound of the original microphone, to the point where you could put an old one and one of ours on a piano or a drum kit, and I think they'd be a good matched pair. The mic just seems to have a nice way of, when singers dig in or when they go in their upper range, that instead of a mid-range getting really barky and peaky, it almost compresses in a really subtle way, almost like an old LA2A. It just has this very gentle way of softening the upper mids. So for a lot of singers, they can kind of work the mic and really, really get a lot of expression without it getting harsh. I did use the mic on Dadiri, the Australian artist that I was mentioning earlier. He sounded great on it. Samir from Young the Giant, who I produced a few years ago, he sounded amazing on that microphone. So I'll find that, for a lot of male singers especially, it's a great choice. Not always the right one, but it's a great one.
So what was the main defining component, as it were, that defined the C37 sound, do you think? Or is it a whole bunch of things?
Hang on. I think it's a lot of things, but the thing we found is it's primarily the transformer. The circuit itself of the microphone is very simple, very, very basic. We did clean up the power supply. A 1953 power supply design doesn't meet standards today. It's noisy, and there's a lot of things that could be done to clean that up. So we did, but the transformer is really the core of the sound. We probably tried about 18 different ones to really get as close to the original as we could. The capsule's a little tricky. It's a very unique design. But after about half a dozen iterations of that, we've got something that we really love. And Brent Casey, who designed the microphone with me, he's hand tuning every single one of these. He's sitting there by ear and with scopes and really, really getting them just perfect.
And why did the C37 need the big heatsink?
That's the later one.
Okay.
The C, there was a C800 and a C800G that had the huge heat sink on it. The C37A is a smaller tube microphone, and there was really no heat sinking in that. It's a 6AU tube. It's a very simple tube and circuit, and it was basically, I want to say they were kind of going for their version of a U67, but I think in the process came up with something totally unique. You can't. It's really a very, very unique sounding microphone.
Where can we go to find out more?
You could go to the Tone Lux website and find it. They're at Sweetwater, Vintage King. All the manufacturers or major retailers are carrying it.
Yeah, awesome. Just to switch things up, Morrissey fans would kill me if I didn't talk to you about your work with Morrissey over the last, well, who knows how many years, but I know there's a new album out this year, isn't there?
Yeah,
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about the background to your work
yes.
with Morrissey?
Well, I've worked on 5 albums with him so far, and it's really such a pleasure. I mean, he truly is one of the greatest artists out there. He's so unique. He's such a great singer. He truly has a vision for each album that we've worked on together, and is just a gentleman and a very smart man, and it's a pleasure to be around. This new album we recorded in France at La Fabrique Studios, which is where they do the Mix with the Masters seminars. This is the 3rd album that we've done there. Brought Morrissey there for the first time in 2014 to do the World Peace album, and he absolutely loved the location. He loves kind of hunkering down with his band and sort of making a family and isolating and working. We'll be there for usually 6 or 7 weeks, and this time we were there for about that. And this album's a little different in its approach in that we layered things up in a different way. They were much more keyboard centric, less about a sort of rock band in the room just going at it. It was much more layered, step-by-step process. I will say I think the songs are great, as always. His lyrics are really just genius. He's very challenging, and in fact there's a song about Jim Falls, which is the waterfalls in Australia, and and as a singer, I mean, he's just great. He's one of those kind of, he to my ear, he's very interesting in that his vocal style is almost that of an old school crooner, but when you think about it, he grew up listening to punk rock music and 80s music. I mean, he loves the Ramones and the New York Dolls, and so it's this crazy combination of this kind of old school traditional singer, but with this kind of punk rock attitude. Sure. It's very interesting. I mean, a lot of times the songs get built around a guide vocal that he does, and it's never more than 2-3 takes at the most, and we'll layer the song up around that vocal. Sometimes he'll go back and try to beat the guide vocal, sometimes not. And again, it's never labored over. It's never really tweaked. It's a U47 Neve preamp, tube tech compressor. He's got a big voice, and what's interesting is that I like to get singers right up on the mic and a few inches away and get it as big and intimate as possible. But he's way back from the microphone. 2-3 feet. Wow. And it's fully present and fat, and it's, like I say, he comes from another school of singing, like those singers in the 50s and 60s. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so what was your role? I guess was it different this time around, or I noticed that you're probably doing more synth work, more programming. Is that right?
Yeah, this time it was definitely, like I said, a much more one instrument at a time process. Very often we would build things up with keyboards first, and then Matt Walker, the drummer, would come in and lay down a basic beat, and then we'd start to bring in guitars or bass or acoustic guitars or pianos, whatever. So it was a very much step-by-step process, where the previous couple of albums, the California Sun and Low in High School, was very much about getting the whole band in the room at once and kind of jamming through things, with Morrissey singing along and sort of finding the arrangement. But this was a little bit more sort of one step at a time process, everybody kind of honing in on their parts slowly.
And did that change, like obviously a Morrissey album, and there's a Morrissey sound, I guess, regardless of how it's approached. Like, is there more to, I guess, the sensibility of the sound of the production than just his vocal delivery?
Yeah, he comes at every album with a strong sense of concept. He knows up front, what he wants to do on this album, what he wants to do differently from the past album. With this particular album, he was very, very adamant about wanting long musical sections, he felt that he was just like, I'm singing too much. All you ever hear is me singing. And, it's time for the band to step out. It's time for us to have musical interludes. And, I want longer bridges, longer intros. I want songs to go different places musically. I don't want it to just be me singing and singing and singing. So, that it was very challenging to come up with bridges or instrumental sections that took left turns and went to odd places. And in fact, there's one song called "The Secret of Music" that he really wanted this to be a 8-minute drugged out and experimental piece. And I actually Moz, I think this could be a great 2-minute little ditty. And he's like, no, this is time for everybody to stretch out and make 6 minutes, I think is the length of the song, make it work. I mean, he's very, very specific about where he goes with things. But at the same time, he gives everybody, all the musicians, a lot of freedom and a lot of flexibility, wants their input. And, he'll come in and say if he doesn't like something, but he's not dictatorial in any way.
Yeah, it must be fascinating as a producer dealing with artists that's been around so long and is obviously so confident in their own, the parameters of what they bring to the project. They're not, they know what they want and they know how they're getting it, and where your position in that mix, I guess, is, and sort of responding to that to sort of, obviously bring what you bring and improve the project without kind of rubbing up against somebody like that in an unhelpful way.
But for me, the interesting thing is it's about having a conversation and a connection with the artist, and certainly has to come from the artist. They have to have a pretty clear direction of where they want to go. But I find for me, as long as I'm in sync with that, and if it makes sense to me, I believe it, then it's easy for me to help them make the best version of that that's possible. I think when an artist goes into making a record and isn't really clear about what they want to do, that's where you get into trouble. I think when you're kind of just wafting for a direction, and I've found, I'm fortunate at times that I am working with a Elton John or Alanis Morissette or whomever it is that's had a number of albums under their belt, and they have a great sense of confidence. Beck or U2, they know who they are, and those are easy projects. Certainly, less experienced artists, it can be a little tricky unless they've sort of got that inner clarity of who they are and how they want to be presented.
I've got a slightly left field question for you without notice, not just in reference to this project, and this may not be a big deal for you, I don't know, so it's just going to put it out there, see how we go. But as a producer, raising the level of intensity or energy or drama in the last chorus, do you have any go-to techniques that you can remember over the years where you've gone, why don't we do this?
I don't, and I'll tell you why. Because I think that it's different with every song. It's different with every artist. With one artist, it might be about the big, edgy power guitars. With another artist, it might be layering up background vocals. With another song, it might be about the string build. Or I don't know if there's a specific trick for that sort of sense of bringing home the last chorus and making it rise. And sometimes you don't want it to rise. Sometimes you want to stay in a certain mood, and maybe you want that sense of, we're finishing off, we're coming home here, but you don't want it to be distracting from the mood. So that's interesting. I'm actually doing a track with Little Dragon right now, and it's interesting. And they're more electronic based, so trying to get that sense of completion and build to the end of the song without it sounding cheesy and without there being, big guitars or overblown synthesizers. It's tricky. And sometimes it's subtle things like an acoustic piano. Maybe it's another layer of background vocals. Maybe all of a sudden the distortion on the synth bass comes up. It's really, I think, song and artist driven.
But do you find that that's something that you, as a producer, especially with younger artists, need to offer some counsel, that you perhaps have a greater sense of the story arc of the song than perhaps the artist or the musicians themselves?
I mean, I think that's sometimes the case, that I might rally for something in particular that I feel like, at this point in the song, you want to get more intimate. And instead of building the second verse, let's deconstruct the second verse, because this is the most intimate lyrical moment of the song. Let's clear some things away so you get to the story more. Or perhaps nowadays it seems like every artist wants to do the sort of drop down chorus or drop down bridge where things empty out, and oftentimes you get a nice sort of connection to the vocal because it's very sparse. But when you listen to the tune, sometimes the entirety of the tune, you sometimes feel like you're being manipulated, you're being pushed around. The dynamics are too extreme, up, down, up, down, up, down. I remember working with Boy and Bear years ago, that I spent a good amount of time with them in rehearsal on arrangements, because Dave's got such a great voice. They all have amazing voices, and you wanted to bring that out, but yet you didn't want those dynamics to pull you left and right. You wanted to stay with the story because he's such a great storyteller. You wanted to really kind of keep the groove as a great underpinning for the vocal to bounce over, but at the same time you wanted it to rise in spots, and it might be a subtle keyboard thing, or in their case, the background vocals are always so great. They're just such great singers and such great players, and but a lot of time was spent working on grooves, and it was it was a great experience working with those guys.
Just to bring this home, Joe, and thanks so much for being so generous with your time, but do you have time to listen much to new music apart from, I guess, the artists that are being kind of presented to you? Or?
Constantly.
Yeah.
My whole life, I'm always looking for, like, what's new. What am I in love with lately? Who's doing things? I like people that are challenging, that try different things. I love artists that have a really singular voice and sound and don't sound like other artists of the day. I'm that's my excitement working with Morrissey is based on that. He's so singular, and I've had the good fortune to work with people like Beck, or years ago as a kid working with Frank Zappa. Those are artists that are so singular in the way they view music and their place in the world. That's such a important thing for me, that every artist have his own voice, his own sound, and I'm really, really aware when I go into a project of how am I going to make that sound different from the last album I did and the one before that, and I'm really cognizant of giving each artist his own character, his own sound. I truly hope that my records don't all sound the same. I hope the album I'm doing for Didiri, I hope that sounds very different from Boy and Bear or Spoon or whomever else I've worked with, the Strokes. That's important. But to your point of listening to new music, constantly. I mean, I'm whether it's in the car or at home, there's so many new things. I just recently got turned on to a Australian artist that I love, Jaguar Jones. Okay, I don't know if you've heard her. I think she's amazing. I think she's an artist. She's a painter. She's a printmaker. She's a storyteller. She just goes for it. She's got such courage. And I think that's part of it. Like, to me, fearlessness is so important, just being out there on the edge and not sounding like anybody else. And I think the world catches up with you eventually. Great novelists, great painters, great filmmakers, eventually they find their place and people get aware of them. So I don't know, that's important to me. You just gotta say,
that passion is the passion is evident in your answer, and kind of makes a little bit of nonsense of the next question I was going to ask you, is like, how do you enjoy listening to new music? Like, do you have to take your producer's hat off?
Yeah.
You do.
Of course. I do. I mean, I think for me, first off, it's, does somebody have that unique voice? And when I say voice, I mean their tone, the way they tell a story, their subject matter, the way the band sounds. That's so important to me. So I want to be grabbed as a listener before I'm grabbed as a producer. I want to hear, Idols or Fontaine's DC and go, whoa, what? These guys don't sound like anything. What the hell is this? Thundercat. I love Thundercat. I don't know what he's doing. He's crazy. He's awesome. Margaret Glaspie I'm into lately. I love her. Middle Kids, another Tame Impala. Avalanches. I'm naming all my favorite Australian bands. But to me, I want Perfume Genius. He's great. Tyler, the Creator. People that just are on their own. They're like living in their own little world. That's what I would. Because I think as a kid, growing up 70s and 80s and listening to LPs, you want to be like taken and thrown into this little universe that takes you to a whole other place, gets you out of the mundane existence you're living, gets you out of all the high school drama, and you want to just be captivated. So any artist that does that, to me, that's like you're one.
Don't we need that now?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. I mean, there's a lot of similarity in pop music and hip hop music these days. And that's the kind of sad part of it. The great thing is that we all have similar technology. We can make records at home. We can really kind of hone our skills and hopefully hone them in a way that they do sound unique and they do sound like something you've never heard of. Billie Eilish, of course, that's why everybody gravitated towards her. She doesn't sound like anything. She was just off in her own little house doing her thing. It's great.
Yeah, quite incredible. Hey, Joe, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I wish you and your family the best and stay safe.
Yes, same to you. Be healthy.
And hopefully talk to you again before too long.